About 65 years ago, an unusual incident took place in Russia that still leaves people puzzled to this day. A group of experienced hikers set out for a remote mountain expedition, hundreds of kilometers away from civilization, where the temperature is always below freezing. Mysteriously, they disappeared during this trip. This is the last picture they took that night before vanishing. Today, numerous theories exist about their disappearance, yet the case remains unsolved. It was so infamous that the area where they vanished was named after them. On January 23, 1959, an experienced group embarked on a highly dangerous adventure. They planned to reach the Otorten mountain, crossing roughly 200 kilometers through the snow-covered, freezing Ural Mountains. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, led by Igor Dyatlov. They carried a small journal to document the details of their journey. All were skilled and experienced hikers, and upon returning, they were to receive Grade 3 certification, the highest level of certification in the Soviet Union at the time. During the journey, one hiker began feeling unwell and decided to return. You can see him separating from the group in the picture. The remaining 9 hikers continued their journey. As they moved forward through the icy mountains, they documented everything in their cameras and journals, and so far, everything seemed normal. On February 1st, 1959, the group reached a place in the mountains known as Dead Mountain, where they decided to set up camp for the night. After this, the events that occurred are unimaginable. This is the last picture they took while setting up their tent, after which they mysteriously disappeared. 2 weeks later, a search team reached the area where the hikers had vanished. All of their personal belongings were found untouched in their place, and looking at the tent, it appeared that the hikers had tried to cut their way out from the inside with a knife, as if they were in an emergency and had to escape quickly. However, the strange part is why they would do this, as they could have exited normally through the tent's entrance despite the cold. The question remains, what could they have seen inside that made them panic and forced them to escape this way? After this, the search team found further footprints of the hikers leading down the mountain. Interestingly, these footprints didn't indicate running, but rather walking, as determined by the spacing between them. After about 500 meters, the footprints disappeared, likely covered by the snow. The search team continued to follow this direction for another kilometer, where they came across a forest with a cedar tree. The tree's branches were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting that the hikers might have tried to climb it, possibly to escape something. Near this tree was a burnt-out bonfire, and beside it lay the frozen bodies of 2 hikers, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko. What was even stranger was that, despite the intense cold, neither of them wore much clothing. Both were dressed only in their underwear. It's shocking that they walked about a mile away from the tent in such freezing temperatures without sufficient clothing for protection. After a 2-month-long search operation, all 9 hikers' bodies were eventually found in 3 separate groups. The second group of 3 bodies was found aligned directly towards the tent, suggesting they were trying to return. Surprisingly, these 3 were also without adequate clothing. The last 4 bodies were found 75 meters away from the tree and buried under 4 meters of snow. This is where the investigation took a more perplexing turn. Out of the 9 hikers, 6 died from hypothermia, essentially freezing to death. However, the remaining 3 showed signs of severe trauma. 2 of the hikers had multiple rib fractures, and the third had a major skull fracture. According to experts, these injuries were consistent with the kind of shockwaves produced by a bomb. Further investigation revealed additional strange details. Zolotaryov's eyes were missing, and Dubinina not only had her eyes missing but also her tongue. Despite the lack of answers to so many questions, the Soviet Union's lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, eventually closed the case. He stated that no crime had occurred here, as all personal belongings were still inside the tent. However, the main question that remains is, what happened to all of them on the night of February 1st? Now, let's start explaining. Dozens of theories exist about this incident. Some suggest that the Soviet Union itself killed the hikers. Others believe aliens were involved, and some even think a Yeti played a role. However, all of these theories lack substantial evidence. But there are 2 theories that accurately represent what might have happened and could be considered plausible. These 2 theories answer the most important questions in this case. The first question: What could have caused the serious internal injuries to 3 hikers? And the second, what might have led the hikers to cut through the tent to escape? Could it be that they were forced to cut open the tent rather than simply using the entrance? After coming out of the tent, the emergency seemed to subside as they walked calmly instead of running, something evident from their footprints. The first theory to explain this is the katabatic wind theory. In 2019, archaeologist Richard Holm visited the site of the incident to understand the location better and to explore what might have happened to the hikers that night. He conducted an experiment by setting up a tent in the exact same way as the hikers during the same month and night to fully understand the conditions. After experiencing the intense cold, he explained the katabatic wind theory in detail.
Explain करते हैं.
In my view, the katabatic scenario is the only theory that would explain all the steps.
A katabatic wind is a powerful descending wind that flows down a mountain slope. Due to gravity, its speed increases significantly, creating hurricane-like conditions without warning. If such a wind had hit the hikers' tent that night, it could have damaged the tent, causing the hikers to quickly cut it open from the inside to escape. As I mentioned, the outside temperature was around -30 degrees, likely causing their clothing to freeze. With little to protect themselves from the cold, they would have set out in search of a warmer place and eventually reached the forest below. At this point, none of them had sustained any serious injuries. After walking about 1,500 meters, they arrived at the cedar tree, where they found wood and started a bonfire to keep warm. It's clear that in such extreme conditions, a single bonfire wouldn't be enough to keep them warm, so they needed to find another warmer place. 4 hikers, who were wearing proper warm clothing, headed right from the tree in search of help. However, after walking a short distance, they noticed a large amount of snow sliding down towards them. In an attempt to save themselves, they hid under a large rock. But then, the snow collided with the rock, causing it to collapse onto them. This is evidenced by the fact that their bodies were found buried 4 meters beneath the snow. The remaining 5 hikers, who were sitting by the bonfire near the tree, couldn't just sit there waiting, as they needed to keep themselves warm somehow. They weren't wearing sufficient clothing to protect themselves from the freezing cold, so they decided to head back to the tent. Their goal was to retrieve their frozen clothes from there, bring them to the bonfire, and try to warm them enough to wear. Unfortunately, due to the intense cold, they froze to death halfway back to the tent as they lacked proper clothing. Among them was their leader, Dyatlov. The last 2 hikers, who were still sitting by the bonfire waiting for the others to return with clothes, eventually succumbed to the extreme cold as well. The second theory is the exhaust pipe theory, which I find the most accurate. To explain this theory, let's first look at the main clue, the tent. The hikers had taken a photo of the tent the night before, where an exhaust pipe can be seen coming out. On the day of the incident, the hikers had made a stove inside the tent and cooked food, which we know because cooked food was later found in the tent by the investigation team. From this, it's concluded that the exhaust pipe may have stopped working, causing smoke to fill the tent and making it difficult for the hikers to breathe. In their panic, they cut through the tent from the inside to escape. There's also evidence supporting this theory, as the search party found burn marks on some of the hikers' bodies. This incident is unique in that there's evidence for nearly every detail. After exiting the tent, the hikers moved further to find new shelter and eventually reached the forest where they started a bonfire near the tree. From here, the rest of the theory aligns with the first one, explaining how each of the hikers met their end. Finally, the question arises about who removed the eyes and tongue of the 2 hikers. It's possible that a wild animal was responsible for this. This entire area was remote, with no other humans or animals around, and no snow sliding occurred in the area. So, both theories provide different reasons for why the hikers left the tent and explain how 3 of them sustained major injuries. While there are many theories related to this case, these 2 seem the most realistic. However, there are still many unanswered questions, and providing a completely accurate explanation for every detail is nearly impossible. This is the end of today's video. See you in the next one.